Give us just to kind of conclude our little kind of introduction to Dundalk here. Give us a couple of little-known facts, interesting facts about Dundalk, historically, or
historical facts. Well, as I was saying, the fact that it was the old Dundalk was designed by the same company that did Roland Park.
That's a shock. Yeah,
it is a shock.
People would not link Roland Park and Dundalk.
And I can show you pictures of sort of houses side by side, and they look very similar.
Yeah, they do.
The scale's smaller, but it's a very similar sort of thing.
Is this a similar shopping center? I know
the old Dundalk
Roland
Shopping Center is designed, has the same sort of design as the shopping center in Roland Park on Roland Avenue. So we've got,
which was, I think, was the first shopping center in the country.
They were some of the first shopping areas around. So we've got those kind of things.
So there's historical depth as well as the fact that it's a sizable community. Our topic today was neighborhood stabilization and change, and you kind of wear both hats, because really the most community councils, they usually only get active when they're fighting against something, with some exceptions.
Yes.
But Renaissance Corporation means rebirth, means revitalization.
It's the challenge of being proactive.
Yeah. And that's something every community needs to have. Both parts, a preservation as well as a renaissance.
Well, you do, and it can be a real challenge. The phrase I like to use, you've got people who are rock throwers, and you've got people who are bricklayers. And it's easy to throw rocks, and it can be fun to throw rocks. But nothing ever gets built by throwing rocks. And laying stones is a much harder job. It's much more time-consuming. You've got to get a lot more cooperation. It's a much harder thing to do. And so one of the challenges that I think we have in our community, and I think in any community, is taking the time to try and figure out first what you need to do, and then having the patience to sort of lay those blocks, because you will run into innumerable roadblocks. There are, it's a lot more difficult, like I said, to get something built than it is to tear something down.
What kind of tips? I mean, you and I are to a certain extent planners and evaluators by trade. What kind of tips would you give to other communities out there that are thinking about that they need revitalization in the planning and data gathering?
Well, I think one of the first things people need to realize, and I think this is particularly true for more suburban communities. The suburbs are a newer phenomenon. Most of them only go back 40, 50 years, and so they haven't thought about needing to fix themselves up. Revitalization is often seen as a city issue, and I think both county residents and county governments still aren't really set up yet to try and tackle some of these issues. So that's been one of the challenges in Baltimore County. For example, we've got a project where they tore down some recent apartment buildings, and they want to put up some new housing, which we completely support. There are alleys in the backs. Do you keep the alleys, or do you build something new? Most new suburban developments don't have alleys. But if you already have the alleyways in place, how do you build that in? Do you keep the old rules? When they do have alleys, they're wider than the alleys that we have now. Do you have to adjust your development rules to realize that you're going to have more infill development or smaller projects than sort of the big greenfield developments further out? So I think these are sort of the challenges and issues that Baltimore County is facing now, because we've got some of the oldest of the inner ring suburbs. But other communities, other places, Harford County, Howard County, are also facing these challenges, and they're still trying to figure out what the tools are.
Yeah, and I guess part of that too is the fact that an older urban suburb like Dundalk is really the locale of a lot of affordable housing.
It is. It is. I mean, as housing tends to sort of filter down through the market. And so on the one hand, that's a real plus for the metropolitan area as a whole. On the other hand, part of revitalization is often trying to remix the population. When I was a kid growing up, we had our local lawyers and doctors who lived there, and the kids went to school with me, etc. Nowadays, a lot of them don't live there anymore. So that changes the income mix. That changes the housing prices. That changes the kind of retail mix you can have. There's a whole kind of filtering down. At the same time, trying to fix some of that means that you're taking out perhaps some of the apartment complexes I was saying. Those were lower cost housing. So when you take those down, what do you do with those people? That becomes a whole other issue that lots of communities don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
They would rather sort of shunt it to certain older communities and not have to sort of say, well, just as I think we did on a larger basis, I think the county sort of said, well, that's a city problem. I think there's often a feeling that, well, this should be an older neighborhood problem.
Yeah, I guess there really is some truth in new Attorney General Eric Holder's statement that we're a nation of cowards when it comes to not talking about some of our fundamental problems.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I think without a doubt, because I think it raises sort of uncomfortable questions about sort of who wins and loses when certain decisions are made.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he was talking specifically about race.
He was.
And about that we need to dialogue more. And by dialogue, he doesn't mean some touchy-feely kind of thing. He just means talking about it.
No, I think race, I think
about it.
Race, class, these are all sort of, as a social scientist, these are things that I'm used to thinking about. But in sort of the neighborhood context, these are hard things to discuss.
And I guess that's part of what Dundalk's dealing with, too, because there's class issues and there's racial issues in Dundalk's renaissance.
Yeah, well, without a doubt. And so trying to balance those things out. So on the one hand, again, from the Dundalk Renaissance Corporation, we have supported some redevelopment of affordable housing. And we have done some affordable housing. At the same time, we're trying to encourage more middle-class people to move in. How do you do that? What are the resources? We've got housing resources available to us if we only wanted to do affordable housing. But if you're trying to revitalize a neighborhood, you're trying to do more than that, well, there aren't as many resources for that. That's typically left to the private sector.
Right.
And so those become the kind of, the various issues we're trying to move between.
Yeah. Could you give us some contact information, please, about the Community Council and the
Sure. Well, the best place for the Greater Dundalk Community Council meets the second Thursday of the month. By far, the easiest way to find out when we're meeting is to look at our good local paper, the Dundalk Eagle. We typically post our announcements there. We're not savvy enough. It's a bunch of volunteers. We don't have a website. The Dundalk Renaissance Corporation, however, does have a website. That's www.dundalkusa.org. There's also a phone number, which I'm going to have to look up. It's 410-282-0261. So we've got a number of different projects and activities. One of the things that we're doing right now, for example, 20 years ago, we had started an urban forestry group, the Greeting of Dundalk, planted a number of trees in the community. That had died out. We're now in the process of redoing that. I think those are also the kind of things that more proactive things that neighborhoods and communities can do to sort of take control of their environment.
Yeah, we started talking about tips for other communities along this process. And you mentioned, of course, I guess we didn't mention, but we kind of talked all around the need to be inclusive in the planning.
Mm-hmm. No, I think the way the Dundalk Renaissance, for example, started was what we'll call an urban design assistance team, where you bring in some outside planners, and it's a real intensive process to try and get the community excited and motivated and to come out. And we had, at some of our meetings, we had several hundred people show up, giving thoughts and ideas about, the question, what did you want to preserve? What did we want to create? What did we want to develop? So, yeah, it's important as one's trying to plan ahead to hear as many voices as possible, recognizing that you're not going to be able to serve every person's needs, because one person's going to want to keep something and someone else is going to want to tear it down.
You got to make priorities.
And at the end, it's priorities and balance. But at a minimum, you should hear everyone and then figure out how to move ahead.
Yeah, yeah. Would you suggest using a consultant?
The advantage of an outside person is that they come in sort of with a fresh look and can give you some fresh ideas. And just because they're an outside person, they can often talk to more people, Person A may not talk to person B, but if you bring in an outside person, they can talk to both of them and sort of find some common ground or find out what the issues are. So there can be some advantage to that, but it doesn't have to be done that way. I think there are multiple ways of doing it. I think the key is to try and have as a goal that you want to be as inclusive as possible, and you want to bring in as many people as possible.
Yeah, I know that it's also important to make sure that you plan for a drop-off in interest.
Yeah, no, as
because
I said,
people get all fueled up about doing
that
something,
is one of the real,
and it's a long process.
That is one of the real challenges, and we talk about that with our county government, et cetera.
Yes.
You come up with a project, you've got the idea. It may take several years before you see a shovel hit the dirt.